And we're live. It is Wednesday, January 29th, the year of some of our Lords 2025. It is 8 a.m. The sun is in fact shining. The birds, every single one of them, are chirping, including the cassowary and the shoebill. They're all chirping. The shoebill, by the way, can't chirp, but it does smash its beak together and sound like a machine gun. All of that is happening, and you are watching.
Sorry, cactuses had not a.
We're watching Dog Shirt TV, an acting revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is an effing revolution in morning television. And because John Rauch is joining us today, we are assiduously using the word effing rather than, bespoil the show with F-bombs. Hello, Ev.
Good morning.
Good morning, Holly Berkley Fletcher.
Good morning. By the way, I've decided this is definitely male because it mansplains. As soon as you start to talk, it immediately interrupts you and starts talking over you, saying exactly the same thing that you're saying, which I believe is the technical definition of mansplaining. Although I tend to do that and I am not male. I'm the terrible interrupter and mansplainer. But nonetheless, I believe the cactus, with his defining character trait and not to mention his
the kind of vertical.
Yes, I believe that we can firmly establish that cactus.
Does the cactus have a name, or is it just the cactus?
I think naming the cactus would actually lower its respect, and it needs a the, it definitely needs a the.
Yeah, I think the cactus may be its name. What do you think, Ev?
I think that for me it will be the cactus.
And
it's fine.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's its name.
The cactus.
The cactus.
Okay.
It's clearly male.
And
we have
Canadian.
It's not Canadian, no. No. We don't have those in here. Too cold.
It's rude. So Canadians are nice.
Oh yes. I'm trying to show the snow. I was trying to flip the camera on my phone so that you can see by the window. It's a
we can't see by the window because there's a snowstorm going on in Canada.
Yeah.
Isn't there always a snowstorm going on?
It seems like it, right? Seems like it.
It seems like to say that's like saying it's sunny in the Bahamas or something.
Yeah, I'm just trying to really clearly push the idea onto you so that you don't ever think of invading us. It's cold on here. You cannot have your inauguration outside, snowstorm. No, just trying to make sure you know about it.
Yeah, so
Greenland is cold. So
Greenland is cold too.
Yeah, he's not, with the exception of the Panama Canal zone, he doesn't seem all that interested in invading warm countries.
Well, his heritage is Scottish, and I also have Scottish heritage, and I can tell you that we are biologically unfit for any sort of heat. So, although he lives in Florida, so it's interesting.
I also think there's something else going on, which is that he's really not attracted to small countries. He likes big spaces, and so he looks at a country like Greenland or like Canada, and he says, "Wow, it's big. It would be like the Louisiana Purchase or the Alaska Purchase." Leaving aside for a minute, the Alaska's Purchase for many, many years was known as Seward's Folly. And I think, we should remind him of that. But he doesn't look at Ecuador and say, I want it.
Hoping actually that he'll discover Sudan. It's very large. There's a lot of gold. Hameti has a lot of gold. This should have been mentioned to him last time he was in office. That's an oversight on our part at CIA. And I'm hoping that he decides he wants to take over Sudan because I don't think he could do any worse. And then he could build his own kingdom there instead of here, and then everybody would be happier.
There we go. You heard it here on Dogshirt TV first. A new plan for American imperialism in Sudan by an Africa specialist from the CIA, Holly Berkley Fletcher. He couldn't do worse. That's the slogan.
I mean, there's genocide, there's civil war, there's economic collapse. I mean, it's a blank slate for him.
I hear you, right? Like, we're going to redirect him to imperialism in Sudan. Look, Canada, it's going to be hard to outgovern the Canadians. Greenland, why would you want it? It's a giant glacier with 50,000 people who live under Danish standards of living, right? But Sudan, you got gold, you got, and the baseline standard of governance there is genocide. So bring it on. Imperialism in Sudan, you might even do some good.
And gold. Don't forget the gold.
Don't forget the gold. And it's big. And, oh, by the way, eminently invadable. Unlike, it's not that, you can just leave the cities as kind of like little self-governing entities, and
there's no cities left. They even destroyed the capital, so he doesn't even have to. It's a blank slate, Ben.
Right. It's a land without a people anymore for a people without a land, as the Zionists used to say. Jonathan Rauch. All of this brings us to Christian America. And I have read your book, as has Holly Berkley Fletcher, and I believe Ev has dabbled in it as well. Holly, as you may know, grew up as an evangelical missionary.
As a kid, I was not a missionary. My parents were missionaries, Ben.
Yeah, right. And then you grew up and you...
Which branch of the church?
Southern Baptist.
And
many different
Holly
countries
grew up in Kenya as a result of this.
Oh, Kenya. Are you an ex-evangelical now?
Sorry?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, I have many thoughts. Your book is incredibly kinder than I am. So,
well, let's hear about that.
Well, so the first question I'm gonna Holly is gonna do a lot of the questioning today, but I want to start with the question of what's a nice Jewish gay boy like you doing writing a book like this about Christianity?
Well, first let me mention the title of the book, since I'm here to inspire people to go and read the book, or at least buy the book, and it's called Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. And what the book says kind of answers your question, I think, which is that America is becoming ungovernable. And one of the important reasons for that, though not the only one, is the collapse of Christianity and its failure to play the role that the founders envisioned for it. And this has caused all kinds of fallout. It turns out Christianity is a load-bearing wall in our liberal democracy. And what brings a nice homosexual atheist Jew, or perhaps if you prefer a Jewish atheistic homosexual, into this is my search for underlying causes for the phenomenon that we all discuss every day, which is the rise of MAGA and ungovernability and chaos and nihilism and affective polarization and all the other things that are making us ungovernable. I think the decline of religion as a socializing force and a source of of to direct people's higher aspirations has had all kinds of bad fallout.
All right. I'm going to do a few setups here. Your basic thesis, as I understand it, is that Christianity, by which you mean evangelical Christianity, has
White evangelical, white Protestantism, yeah.
Or just white Protestant, because you talk about the main lines too.
Yeah,
has
they're in
has has thinned out and become a highly political revenge machine, grievance-based system, and is therefore no longer fulfilling its compact with democracy. And a lot of readers are going to say, wait a minute, what compact with democracy? Which is really the subject of your first chapter. And, the lesson we learn in school is separate domains, whether you call it religious freedom, government doesn't interfere, or non-establishment, religion doesn't interfere with government. We have two very separate zones, and we don't intermingle them, and when we do, that's, prayer in a Texas football field. It's controversial, right? And so what do you mean when you say there's a compact between Christianity and democracy, or a social contract between them?
It's implicit but important. First, what I am not saying, which is this is a Christian nation, or you have to be a Christian to be a good American citizen, or that the founders were evangelical Christians, or that we shouldn't have robust separation of church and state. I'm not saying any of those things which some dominionists and the like do say. I am saying that there's an implicit bargain that the founders made. Religious freedom. Government stays out of the affairs of religion. And that's amendment number 1 in the Constitution. But they also warned us, they pretty much all warned us, as clearly as they possibly could, that the Constitution is not self-sustaining from a moral point of view. It relies on virtue in the people. They called it Republican virtue. Those are virtues like lawfulness and civility and truthfulness, and so forth. The things that are necessary to make a republic flourish. And on the other side of the equation, they said, you Americans are going to have to go out and cultivate those virtues in civil society. The Constitution won't give them to you, but you have to get them somewhere. And that was going to come from civic organizations, of course, and families, of course. But they took for granted, as everyone did then, and as everyone did until very recently, that the biggest source of that in the United States would be Christianity, that it would disciple people, as Christians say, or socialize them, as secular people would say, into the kinds of virtues that are necessary to run a republic. And when that does not happen, it turns out Christianity is a load-bearing wall, and nothing else works very well.
Holly?
Oh, okay. Are you ready for me to dive in, Ben?
By all means.
I want to hear why I'm understating the problem.
Well, so obviously I agree with your central premise that, the illness in American religion has obviously become of concern for all of us who live in this pluralistic democracy. And there's a definite interest in a healthier Christianity. But I guess to me, you're making a lot of assumptions that I just don't, in my own life anyway, are just not borne out. I don't think white evangelicalism has ever been much of a source of virtue, frankly. It is, it's rooted in pro-slavery Christianity. I mean, white evangelicals like to try to claim the abolitionist mantle, but the abolitionist, their theological framework is much more of an antecedent to what would become more mainline white Protestantism. white evangelical theology, which Ben will, our folks here will get me tired of me talking about inerrancy, but that's the core of their theology and interpretation, and it's a social control mechanism. It's revanchist, and white evangelical white evangelical theology is very much rooted in pro-slavery Christianity. It has justified and propped up racism and sexism. It continues to be a cover for abuse of women in the church. Just in my own life, my experience with white evangelicalism is that it is inherently fear-based. It is not, and the ethic is very narrow. It's very narrowly focused on a few personal things, mainly related to sex. And there's not, and I say this as the child of missionaries who are supposedly the superstars of evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, so wait, pause there, Holly. So this is a pretty profound challenge to the premise. What is the argument that this branch of Christianity has ever been playing the virtue-filling role that you're describing? I understand it with respect to Anglicanism, but it's 1950. What are the virtues that evangelicalism is instilling on behalf of the Constitution?
So the evangelical movement in America, as we know it today, its current form, is actually pretty new. And my book is not about a return to some halcyon past, which never existed. It is a call to modern evangelicals to incorporate the teachings and elevate, I should say, the teachings of Jesus in their faith. I am gay, as we've discussed, and as you all know, and I was born in 1960. And I grew up, I'm not only gay, I'm three minorities that they disliked. I grew up believing that the white evangelical church, or actually Christianity, because I believe that white evangelicals pretty much spoke for Christianity, I believed that it was bigoted, cruel, and hypocritical. And I was not wrong about that. It often was those things. I have been on a journey these past few years of understanding that there are teachings of Jesus that are profoundly humane and profoundly liberal, that Jesus is far, far closer to James Madison than he is to MAGA. And the core argument of this book is that you can take the three main principles of Christianity and draw a straight line to them, to the core principles of liberal democracy. So no, I'm not saying it was just peachy when white Protestants were supporting slavery. Not all of them did, by the way. Okay, let's be clear about that. The church.
Oh yeah, the abolitionist movement. It's just that white evangelicals
the church split over slavery, and thus proved my view that religion doesn't make people stupid. It's the other way around. But so no, Holly, I am not saying there was a golden age. Let's go back to it. I'm saying, why not give Jesus a try, evangelicals? Because what you're doing now is bad for your witness and bad for the country.
Yeah.
And who are you to make this argument? I mean, I share a lot of it. I share a lot of your things, but I also have a sense that this is not my argument to participate in, being outside of the community. It's not my place to tell Muslims how to practice Islam, or Christians
I want to persuade you that you're wrong, actually. That's where I started out. This is pretty much the last book that I ever thought I'd write, because 23 years ago, I was writing, isn't it great that America's secularizing, because Christianity and religion are sources of division and ignorance and dogma, and won't we all be like, we'll be Scandinavia without it. We'll just be harmonious and enlightened. And that's not what happened. It turns out that, Ben, you and I have to care, because most people, a lot of people, let's say, have a need for an account of why they're on this planet, that's something larger than themselves, that gives them a source of identity, a sense of community, and a mission in life that's transcendent. And it turns out if they can't get that from a great established religion, they'll go elsewhere. And it turns out that the elsewhere where they go is worse. In many
It
cases,
can be. It
really
can.
bad. Well, I think even at its best, if you take something like Soul Cycle, which has even described itself as a pseudo-religion, a cult, it seems, Holly's cracking up.
I've never done so. I'm a solid core cult member.
Is that
I'm
a
not
cult
a
also?
That's
Yeah.
a bit of a
Oh,
cult.
solid core
Is
is
Orange
a cult.
Theory a cult?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
But not,
okay.
I don't think quite in the same way.
No,
But
solid core
but
is
solid core is a hardcore cult that
Yeah.
both Holly and
So-
I have been members of.
So these, whatever they are, cults or whatever, probably do not have actively malevolent teachings. On the other hand, they can't come close to filling the roles that the great religion can play, of providing a transcendent moral vision of life, grounding that in age-old teachings, transmitting that to young people across generations, providing a genuine source of community and worship. They are inadequate to all of those tasks, and so they leave what's been called the God-shaped hole. The bigger ones, the things like, I think you can make a case MAGA is a substitute religion, and that what's called wokeness is a substitute religion, and QAnon, and Christian nationalism, which is in fact not Christian. It's calls itself Christian. These things are actively toxic to liberalism, and that's where people are going. So I'd rather they go to Jesus.
So again, just to, I'm still a Christian, a practicing Christian. I'm a mainline Christian now, and I'm actually a huge fan of Jesus. I'm a Methodist now. I'm a huge fan of Jesus, his actual teachings, which were quite doctrinally spare. They're very much an ethic and a sort of a way. And unfortunately, then organized religion created this entire superstructure on top of something that is very basic, honestly, and very spare. And that's sort of where the problem has come in. The history of organized Christianity is not, it's not a proud history, shall we say. And so at some point,
it's partly a very proud history. So
here and there,
some credit where it's due. It's not all bad.
Here and there. But okay, but I agree with much of what you're saying, but just as a counterpoint, again, in my own life, I was raised in a very fundamentalist, controlling theological framework, very fear-based. I woke up every day afraid I was going to die and go to hell, even though supposedly I had taken the magic pill that would get you into heaven. And stepping out of the lines, it was very conformist, very controlling, very authoritarian. And that's kind of one of my issues with both the religion that I was raised in but kind of religion writ large. And that is that, do you think there's something, religion responds to a human fear of death at bottom. And I feel like that can very easily, it's certainly exploitable by pernicious leaders like Donald Trump, for instance. And I have found myself, as I've gotten further, as I've gotten less and less religious, and again, I'm still a practicing Christian, but I'm honestly very agnostic. Like I don't, that's the other thing is you had all the answers and everything was certain. Like you knew where you were going when you die. You knew like what God was. You knew what the secrets of the universe was, which are all unknowable things. But you had to, it was all built on this like grasping certainty. And then as I've gotten out of that, at first it was terrifying to sort of let that go. But then it's incredibly liberating. And I feel like I am a better person. My relationships are more authentic. My community is richer. I'm more at peace than I ever was as a more religious person, the less religious I become. So I just wonder if there's something about religion as it speaks to human fear that is ripe for exploitation. And certainly authoritarians have repeatedly exploited particularly conservative religious people.
Well, sure. I mean, you're talking to a gay person born in 1960, for heaven's sake, you know? No one needs to tell me about the horrible things that organized Christianity has done. I literally couldn't spin the dial on my car radio in my teens in the 70s without hearing a pastor somewhere preaching that I was a stench in God's nostrils. So of course that's true. But so my book is about Christianity, and it's addressed to Christians. It is, as Ben points out, rather presumptuous in that way. But the core of the book is not to treat Christianity as just an empty vehicle for sociology, politics, economics, or whatever's happening at the moment. It's to say that there are substantive doctrines that underlie Christianity and make it rather unique. And those three doctrines are, first, this is not from me, by the way, this is from, great theologians. Number one, don't be afraid. The most frequently repeated injunction, I'm told, in the Christian Bible, maybe the Bible as a whole. Number two, imitate Jesus. And number three, forgive each other. Those three things map very nicely onto the core premises of Madisonian liberalism. Don't be afraid means sometimes you're going to lose an election. It's okay. Don't panic. Be like Jesus means respect the equality and dignity of every person, and especially look out for the weakest among us. Core liberalism. And number three, forgive each other. That maps pretty well onto forbearance. When you win an election, you're not out to crush the other side and rid the country of their baneful presence. You're going to share the country with them and treat them as you will want to be treated someday if they're in charge. Those are substantive ideas, and we need more of them. So I'm not particularly interested in debating the sins of Christianity in the past, the way it has been perverted by organized churches of all kinds, the way it is being perverted today by Vladimir Putin and the Orthodox Patriarch, which is really, frankly, shocking. I think Ben will know a lot
Kirill
about that.
is invited on the show at any time to discuss this if he wants to rebut Jonathan's point. I'm happy to do the conversation in Russian if he's not comfortable in English. Patriarch Kirill, join us. We will happily do a show with you to
Will you fight him?
Scandalous
You challenge him to a fight?
And yes, if you prefer to do it in an octagon, as soon as I'm over COVID, I will accommodate you.
So I am hopeful that I can reach two audiences with this message that Jesus is like Madison, not MAGA. And the first is secular people who were coming from where Ben was coming from, which is, this is not my fight. I think we have to do what we can to encourage and welcome Christianity of the real Christian type, and understand that we have a stake in its flourishing, and that we were part of the negligence, if not hostility, to Christianity, which made it difficult for it to do its job. But then the second audience is presenting myself as a friendly, surprisingly friendly voice from the outside to Christians, that we need you right now. We need Christ right now. We need you to be more Christ-like and not less Christ-like, because what you're doing now is hurting your church and it's hurting the country. So won't you please think about what the Gospels actually say? And yeah, Holly, you're exactly right. Jesus did not write a constitution. He did not have a political philosophy. He did not have lots of commandments about how to live. But he also had more than a general attitude, I would argue. Well,
I think he had a whole philosophy that was very radical and is still very radical.
And very challenging.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I want to... Oh, sorry. Were you not finished?
I'm finished.
So I have a question about the second essay in the book, which relates to what you describe as sharp Christianity, and you begin it with a long discussion of a series of thinkers, Patrick Deneen and Sohrab Ahmari, who are Adrian Vermeule, who are associated with the so-called post-liberal. I would describe them more as frank authoritarians, but the kind of academic critique of liberalism that is in vogue right now. Your one of the things I noted about this is that these thinkers are, I think, all Catholic. That none of them are from the evangelical tradition, and it made me wonder how much of the challenge that you're confronting is really a orthodox, not small o, orthodox Christianity issue um, rather than an evangelical issue specifically. The book is framed as about white evangelical Protestants, but a lot of the intellectual content that you're dealing with is actually coming out of Notre Dame, coming out of more more Catholic traditions than evangelical traditions. So where does Catholicism fit in with all of this?
Um, so you're right. Many of the key post-liberal theorists are Catholic. I'm not particularly hung up on which denomination those folks do or don't come from. I see them as a kind of political bloc. Um, Catholics are, let's face it, just better than white Protestants, white evangelicals have been at theorizing, and I guess they probably always will be. It's a famous book called, what is it, The Intellectual Bankruptcy of the Evangelical Church. There is a kind of degenerate version of post-liberalism that's quite prominent in evangelical world. By the way, evangelical is a broad term. It's not a denomination. It includes a lot of people who are non-denominational and charismatic. It's a lot of things, but it's not a specific church. They have a degenerate version of this, which is basically Christian nationalism. And that's a hard thing to define because it's
I just want to break in and point out the loveliness of the gay guy referring to the evangelical thought as degenerate. That's beautiful, Jonathan, and I see what you did there.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And this is a much less theorized view that basically Christians should run the country. And Christians are political winners, and if Christians aren't, self-defined Christian winners aren't political winners, they should be. And these are people, they have strange names like Seven Mountains Christianity and Dominionism, and of course, Christian nationalism. And so they're out there too, and they're less theorized, but they're also basically saying our society is going to hell because we're not running it, and democracy and liberalism are killing us, are destroying our country. I do go after, in the book, I have a short section on the post-liberal theorists because they do have influence. They are providing the intellectual firepower for a broader movement, which is, on the whole, I think, actually anti-intellectual. And so, I confront them without trying to make my book about them. And I also grant that there is a kernel of truth in what they're saying. If you divide what they're saying by 10 or maybe 20, it is hard to be a Christian in today's liberal, consumeristic, individualist America. That's true. And liberalism has not done as much, modern liberalism has not done, we liberals have not done as much as we could have and should have to understand the importance of faith and faith traditions in our country, and we should fix that. But no, we are not to blame for their decision to go all in with the MAGA movement and Donald Trump. That was a catastrophic mistake, and they made that mistake. We didn't make it, they made it.
Can I ask about the mainline tradition, which you have some really interesting things to say that that's not a major focus of the book, but you have some really interesting things to say that I appreciated. You say at one point that yes, you say something like the mainline Protestant tradition, and you point out some good things about it, responding to sort of social equality and justice in society and things like that. But they never planted its flag in Scripture the way that a more conservative tradition would, and that you would like to see the revival of the mainline tradition. And I have to say that really resonated with me in my experience. The two things I see the problem with the mainline, and I do think there's a little bit of movement. And it's more anecdotal at this point, and we'll see it if it picks up, of ex-evangelicals going to the mainline. Most of them probably just remain unchurched, but there is a movement of ex-evangelicals going to the mainline. But I think what you bring up, the scriptural issue, my pastor is actually rants on this too. Like, nobody's mainliners they might read a book about Martin Luther King or whatever, but they're not actually studying scripture, and their scriptural literacy is actually pretty poor, which I would agree with that. I have extraordinarily good scriptural literacy, not on the level of Ben, but from all of my years of evangelical schooling, I would say a lot of it was an ahistorical approach to the Bible, but nonetheless. And then you also talk about you kind of don't talk about this directly with the mainline, but obliquely, I think it's applicable. When you don't have the conformity, the insistence on, like, this is what we believe, like the Mormons, for instance, there's a tremendous conformity involved in that culture that is foundational to the strong community. And what you see in the mainliners is it's very freeing for me to be able to ask the questions you're not supposed to ask, or that I couldn't ask as an evangelical, or have different thoughts about, like, I don't know if this is actually, this in the Bible is applicable to now, where you could get excommunicated in the evangelical tradition. But because there's not this insistence on conformity, the community is definitely looser. People's levels of commitment are lower. And I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of what mainline Protestants could do to somehow thread that needle of, like, we allow debate. Maybe I think the Jewish tradition is instructive. Like, we allow debate and discussion and whatever, but that is the source of real community and commitment.
I don't have advice for the mainline church, and I give it short shrift in this book, and I get dinged for that by people who say, hey, what about Niebuhr? I give short shrift to the black church. King is, one of the great thinkers in the realm of how Christians should approach the civic environment. I just skip pretty much right past the mainline because its decline is a phenomenon of the last century. It's according to sociologists, this I think resonates with what you're saying, Holly. The mainline decline had a lot to do with its losing its cultural distinctiveness. Do I still have sound, by the way? The background sound I was hearing. Someone muted. Good. Okay. It lost its cultural distinctiveness and became kind of a general do-gooding idea, not fundamentally rooted in scripture, not countercultural, and instead blended into the surrounding culture. Became like a consumer good. You'd show up every now and then, and that was kind of all that it asked of you, and that just wasn't enough for people. The decline of the mainline I distinguish from the decline of, or the secularization, or some would say politicization, of the evangelical church, because I think the decline of the mainline was very well motivated in the sense that it said, let's open ourselves up to going out into society and making the world a more just place. So I see it as a well-intentioned and open-hearted effort to engage the world that lost its way. And yeah, I have a sentence or two where I say, I don't know if the mainline churches can revive themselves, but I sure hope they do. They really were, for most of America's history, the central socializing force in socializing people into the kind of Republican virtues that the founders depended on. And I think for the most part, the mainline churches did a pretty good job of that, actually. I'm not sure you'd agree with that. I'd
Well,
be curious,
I'm
but
obviously I'm more sympathetic than to evangelicals.
yeah, and they did a lot of work theologically that was important. They did bring us Niebuhr, for example. So I would love to see them come back. And yeah, there's stirrings that suggest that maybe the next generation's getting interested again, though it won't be our parents' version. Late young millennials and Gen Zers want a much more customized kind of religious experience, and they want more participation. And so we don't know quite what that will look like. But it sure would be interesting.
Can I just ask on a
Yeah,
follow-up?
Sure.
Just, I was personally like really impressed and also inspired and encouraged by the Bishop Buddy's sermon in front of Trump. And to me, that was a real Christian statement that was also courageous. I think that's the thing that this moment maybe offers the main line is to, there's courage that's needed. And that was an example. And when you see someone speaking the true gospel of Christ in a courageous way, like she did, it's really attractive.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yesterday I taped Andrew Sullivan's podcast, and I had not listened to what Bishop Buddy said. I had read the news accounts. But he portrayed her as a demonstration of the radical woke takeover of the mainline churches, with her statement that trans children were losing their lives. And so I went and watched the segment, and I was struck by it the same way you were. It was an attempt by a clergy person to make a statement on behalf of Jesus, in a way that will be at least somewhat costly to her. And I don't know, would conservatives complain if a Catholic bishop had told President Biden to his face, I hope in your presidency that you will look out for the lives of the vulnerable, including the hundreds of thousands of unborn children and their lives? Would they have said, well, that's an outrageous politicization of the church? I don't think so. I think they would have seen that as a statement of conscience. So I had no trouble with it, actually.
All right. I want to shift gears a little bit to a different denomination that you treat in the book in a rather surprising fashion, which is the famously pro-gay rights woke Church of Latter-day Saints, which, as we all know, has been at the vanguard of inclusion and all that jazz. So the cynic in me says, okay, Rauch needed an unlikely hero for the last chapter of the book, and he, went and found one. And this is his contrarianism coming out. Make the case that the right model for evangelicals is the LDS Church.
Well, it's not the right model. Though evangelicals and other Christians who are not Latter-day Saints will have to do it in their own very different ways. But it's the right project. So the project is to build a civic theology. And a civic theology asks the question, which I think Christians, both mainline and evangelicals, have failed to ask and answer over the past however many years, which is, how would Jesus like us to behave in our relations in civic life, meaning basically social media and the world of politics? The church has been, pretty good at discipling people, that is, making people in the image of Jesus, or trying to get them to be in the image of Jesus in family and church life and community life. And when Hurricane Helene hits in Asheville, the churches are there. But there's a big empty void in the space of, so how are we supposed to engage on social media? How do we treat each other in the realm of politics? And that void has been filled with, as I probably don't have to persuade the people on this call, extremely bad behavior, including bad behavior, and often especially bad behavior on the part of people who call themselves Christians. So some Christians are starting to ask themselves, boy, how did we let that happen? And one group that started to ask themselves that is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One reason I wrote this book was discovering, to my surprise, through my life as a gay marriage activist, that this church was doing something profoundly countercultural. It is a very conservative church. It is a very white church in the United States. It looks a lot like the evangelical church demographically and doctrinally, politically. Yet, it has developed a civic theology of patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation, what it calls peacemaking, which says not we're giving up on our theology, we're becoming all squishy on homosexuality. I pray for a revelation there, but it hasn't happened. But they are saying our role in society needs to be to try to expand the space for negotiation rather than contract it. And instead of approaching politics from a defensive culture war posture of fear and loathing, approach politics from the sense of, okay, can we look for solutions that will deconflict the situation? And they think that's what Jesus wants them to do. Their current number 2 person, who will probably soon be their number 1 person, Dallin Oaks, is a University of Chicago law professor and a former Utah State Supreme Court justice who is profoundly versed in the doctrines of the Constitution and James Madison, and sees them as divinely inspired. So I'm looking at this and thinking, and by the way, they're doing it. They're just not they're not just saying it, they're doing it. They helped pass the Respect for Marriage Act, which cemented my marriage in federal statute, even though they are against gay marriage. And they did that because they got some very important religious liberty protections in exchange, and because their view is, as long as our church can practice our teachings in our community, we are not in the business of telling other people how they should go about their lives. That's refreshing. You don't see anything like that from the U.S. Conference of Bishops, and very, very little of it in the evangelical world. So I'm looking and saying, okay, I'm not suggesting that white evangelicals should mimic their theology. It's a different theology, but I'm saying they should follow the same project. How would Jesus want us to behave in our civil relationships?
They also, you point out, just as attitudinally, it's a very different posture as well to the outside world. I mean, a lot of this is rooted in their particular history as a marginalized, persecuted religious minority in the United States versus evangelicals are used to being, or white Protestants are used to being, sort of owning the culture. So yeah. That's true. But just their attitude, I just find with the Mormons I know, just attitudinally too, it's like, again, they have a sense of humor about themselves. They're not threatened if people say bad things about Mormonism. The thing that really, the anecdote that really demonstrates this, I think, is if you go see the musical, The Book of Mormon, which is, at the end of the day, it has some positive things to say about organized religion. But generally speaking, I think we can agree that it really lambastes Mormonism and the church. And if a musical like that had been made about the Southern Baptists per se, the Southern Baptists would be on a war path and would be boycotting everything or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mormons, if you go to the play and look in the playbill, there's an ad for the the Book of Mormon, the real Book of Mormon, and the ad says, hey, thanks for your interest in the Book of Mormon. If you're curious about the real Book of Mormon, you can like order it at this website, or there's
Yes.
it says something like, thank you
The
for your
famous,
interest in the
the
Book of Mormon.
famous headline is, "You've seen the play, now read the book."
That's right. That's right. And to me, I was just so struck by that, this sort of lightness of like, and just not being threatened, like you can mock us, like that's fine. Just why don't you look into it for yourself? And that's just a completely different posture. So,
Yeah, it is not a fear-based posture, and that is refreshing because they have reason to be fearful. I spent a week out there and did a deep dive and talked to a lot of people, and then one guy said, "Yeah, sure, we've been persecuted and we're ridiculed, but so what?" And I said, "What do you mean, so what?" And he said, "We've got some work to do. We're just going to do that work." That's refreshing.
So that's so let's we're running a little bit low on time. I want to make sure Ev has a chance to ask any questions she may have, since she is less likely to break in and demand space. Ev, the floor is yours if you want it.
Okay, right. I do have one question, maybe about like what liberals may gain from like this kind of compromising with Christianity. In the book, you say that like on homosexuality, those kind of compromise have helped legislators opening up their hearts about homosexuality. Do you can you explain how it played out and how you've seen this, or like how people you've interviewed have experienced this kind of opening up of the hearts?
Yeah, that's a quotation from Troy Williams, who is the executive director of Equality Utah, which is the LGBT group in the state, and was involved in the negotiations that produced what's called the Utah Compromise in 2015, which was a remarkable instance of civic peacemaking where the church and the LGBT community and conservatives in the legislature came together to pass a bill ensuring non-discrimination against LGBT people in Utah, and including in that bill specific carve-outs for religious organizations, so that Brigham Young University does not have to include married gay couples in its married student housing. And that got my attention. In fact, that's the first thing that made me think, wait a minute, something weird is happening in Utah that's very countercultural. And what Troy says is that the effect of that compromise was about far more than just the legal changes that it made. It changed the whole spirit in the state around the gay community, because producing that compromise opened channels of communication and trust between the church and the LGBT community, which had not existed, channels which persist to this day. It also opened up channels between the LGBT community and conservatives in the legislature so that they were able to negotiate subsequently some very difficult issues that in other states have just been culture war, like conversion therapy. The state actually banned that in Utah. The compromise changed the attitude of the population in the state to one that's robustly supportive of non-discrimination toward LGBT people. A poll found that Utah was the second most favorable state in the country to that. This would not surprise Madison, because Madison understood that compromise is not just splitting babies, in back rooms and coming out with deals that make everyone unhappy and compromise on our principles. He understood that compromise is a creative, dynamic process that forces people to expand the decision space, the option space, come up with new solutions, bring in new actors, try things they never thought of before, you often wind up in a better place than where either side went in with. And that's exactly what we found in Utah. I had dinner last week with Troy Williams in Salt Lake City, and he reaffirmed all this. And he is trying to figure out how to take this model to other states because it worked a lot better than what, unfortunately, the LGBT groups are doing right now.
Okay, so let's focus on the other side of that equation, not the LGBT side, but the religious side. You need a partner. The LGBT groups need a partner for that project. And to a lot of people's surprise, including yours, and by the transitive property mine, when you described this project that you were watching, the LDS Church proved a plausible and constructive partner for such an enterprise. It's very hard to imagine the evangelical churches engaging on that basis. And so I'm interested in the closing minutes here for your thoughts of what would have to happen for evangelicalism to undertake the same project of civic peacemaking that the LDS Church did in Utah.
It would take, well, first I should just say in passing that Latter-day Saints were not the only conservative religious group that helped pass the Respect for Marriage Act. The Seventh-day Adventists, who are very conservative, were part of that. The Orthodox Union, that's Orthodox Jews who are very much against gay marriage, contributed, and so did the National Association of Evangelicals, which does not speak for example, the Southern Baptists, but they were there. So we were seeing some people in non-Mormon world who are doing the same thing. I think what it takes is first an understanding that what they've been doing now is not working, that it is causing the rapid shrinkage, in fact, the collapse of the white evangelical church. We didn't get into that, but the numbers are startling and unprecedented. Second, it means that a new generation of pastors and parishioners will return to the words of Jesus and say, wait a minute, how can we be peacemakers? How can we move away from the culture wars and back to our core teachings? And there's a little bit of evidence that that's starting to happen. Third, it requires a positive effort by some of the thinkers and leaders in that community to begin thinking through civic theology. And again, in a small way, that's started to happen. But there's groups and there's projects out there. There are things like the One America Project and the After Party, and the Center for Christianity in Civic Life, I think it's called, and others that are saying, look, we've got to figure out a better modus operandi. Russell Moore, who's an inspiration for this book, former very senior official in the Southern Baptist Convention, now editor of Christianity Today, says that the way this will happen, it's not going to be like, an apocalyptic TV battle between the MAGA church and the anti-MAGA church leading to a schism and then some outcome. That the way Christianity renews itself historically is from the bottom up. That you get new pastors, you get church plantings, you get changes in the small groups, which is how evangelicals socialize themselves. And, that's the Bible studies and so on. You get a younger generation that comes in that's hungry for a more Jesus-centered message in its own way. And you begin to rebuild from the bottom. And you tell me if that can happen.
Well, I would just like to close.
It's happening, but can I just say, I think it can happen, but I think there's there's a creative destruction process unfortunately, I think a lot of what is white evangelicalism, I think it is dying and it needs to die, but the death throes are incredibly damaging and fraught and dangerous. But I don't, I think the white American church is undergoing just massive change, and I do think things will look much different in 50 years, 100 years, but we have to get through this period where a fear-based authoritarian group is terrified of losing power in society and is basically trying to overthrow democracy. And that's not good.
Yes, and getting through it will require not just rowing, but also steering.
Well, I would just like to propose, in the spirit of radical suggestions here, that the next step in this project for you, Jonathan, is to start a church. And specifically to do it in your capacity as a Jewish atheist gay guy, who's not going to become a Christian, but is going to be a pastor anyway. Because I think and it's going to be an evangelical church. And
That church.
because I would go to that church, and it'll be about civic religion and about the role that the kind of Christianity that the democracy needs, not the kind of Christianity that you think is, or anybody thinks is, what's actually required by Scripture. Democracy-based Christianity run by a Jewish atheist gay guy. On that perfectly absurd note, Jonathan Rauch, you're a great American. It's great to see your face. You should come back, as you do, regularly and often, including to co-host episodes. You're always welcome in your capacity as guru of back from the In Lieu of Fun days, the earliest days of the pandemic. Ev, Holly, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to be back tomorrow. Today is day 5 of Dogshirt TV with COVID. Day 10, I think, of the Trump to the sequel presidency. And the clash between the murderous clash between the two is taking a toll on my body, but the COVID at least is going away slowly but surely. We will be back tomorrow, I think still with COVID, I think still with Trump, and bring it on. Thanks, Jonathan.